It definitely worked in provoking thought. Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome to my movie club. Please grab some tea. Today we are talking about adaptation. This episode was a lot for me. I was baffled by some of the changes that the show made to the story. And then as I was in the weeds and as I was writing it all out and looking at the material and rewatching episode 1, my anger shot the moon, and now I'm back on board. I just had to like work myself back into it. I really had to sit with it. I want to see where they go with it, because I think I see what you're doing here. What do you got? And I would like to try to recreate that experience for you now. So I divided my thoughts up into 4 sections: the wolf fight, Lestat's agency as a character, the changes from Gabrielle to Gabriella, and sexual commodification. I love an adaptation. What I'm interested in is, why are those changes being made? What are they in service of, and how do they inform the story that this show is trying to tell? Part 1, Wolfkiller, or serial killers start with animals. In episode 1, Lestat comments on his portrayal in an interview with the vampire and calls his depiction a mayonnaise villain with sociopathic tendencies. But he's not a sociopath. He's a serial killer. He's a mass murderer. That's what it is to be a vampire. And one omission between the books and the show that I think is interesting, especially when looking at the wolf fight, is the context that Lestat was a hunter before he became a vampire. In the source material, at least, he was rewarded from a young age for channeling his rage into violence. There was a structure around it. He was the provider, which I did think that they would be interested in speaking about, especially when we've set the show now in the MAGA era. The justification, the righteousness of that violence is something that was instilled with him from a very early age. In season 1, we see the toll that killing takes on a character like Louis, but Lestat in the source material is defined as a killer who wants to be good. He tries to be a priest and then an actor, but both times he's brought back. Violence is the only outlet, the only self-expression which is glorified. His desire for violence coexists with his desire for good. And what happens in the wolf fight is that desire for good and that desire for violence start to blur. The lines are not quite clear. There is this, uncertainty, this, personal uncertainty with, am I a monster? Trying to go out to do something good and then becoming a monster in the process. And that monster being inside of you. Which, funny enough, is the same thing that happens when he tries to become a rock star. It's the thrill of the hunt. He tells Gabrielle, I feel in myself the desire to murder. I felt like someone different when I killed the wolves. And now I don't know who is here with you. Your son, Lestat, or that other man, the killer. His mother tells him, no, it was you who killed the wolves. You're the killer and the man. The fight with the wolves was moved off screen, and I think that that's largely fine, because there's nothing that you necessarily need a fight with 8 wolves to do that you can't do in other scenes. I do think that it's interesting that in the context of the show, this is a fight whose details are omitted by Lestat, the narrator. He is keeping it away from us. When you understand the context that this was the moment where he starts to see the killer inside of himself, it is an interesting little bit of deception, of keeping that killer away from the audience. When he gets back, Gabrielle says they haven't the imagination to know what happened out there on the mountain, and she likens it to childbirth, that I'd gone into the circle of hell and come back out. They hadn't been in the circle of hell. I understood the meaning of utter loneliness. But in the show, the fight with the wolves happens off-screen. The one that's othered from Lestat is the viewer. The viewer is one of the ignorant many who have not gone into the circle of hell. And it serves to further isolate Lestat. He is isolated not only from the characters in the narrative, but also from the audience. The wolves are a symbol of pack mentality, and Lestat is the Wolfkiller. He is the hunter who destroys the old ways. They keep the wolf fight off screen, but he does kill his brothers and his father. You know, there is a pack that Lestat slaughters in the end of the episode. The first flashback introduces us to Lestat's 5 dead siblings, and then cuts to the Leoncourt dining table, where 3 more will join the deceased. They are the pack that Lestat battles, and it's in the wolf fight that his desire to kill becomes explicit. He tells his mother, "I dream sometimes that I might kill all of them. I kill my brothers and my father in the dream. I go from room to room, slaughtering them as I did the wolves." They are the murders that we watch him commit. But it wasn't his decision to kill them. Gabriella is the one who suggests they kill their family. The metaphorical killing of the wolves, which symbolizes his capacity for violence, his desire for murder, and his inability to distinguish between good and violent, is given to his mother. Lestat insists in narration that killing, draining, and drinking are the capstones of vampiric desire. But we're never shown this catharsis on screen, and we're not given the time to appreciate his enjoyment of the violence because the scene is intercut with him in the present day, singing In Distress, you know, a French song, which Gabriella protests to. She says, "Your father's tongue," and he insists, "My tongue." He identifies himself alongside the family that she impressed upon him to kill. He is the lone member who survived. Lestat is framed not as the wolf killer, horrified by his enjoyment of destroying the pack, but he is a reticent member of that pack. He is their betrayer, whose obedience to his mother makes him the only one to survive. Lestat in the show is stripped of agency in 2 defining moments of his life. The fact that the agency of killing the wolves is given to Gabriella instead of Lestat was shocking to me. I was shocked by that. I was more shocked that the agency of the wolf fight was given to Gabriella instead of Lestat than I was about the wolf fight itself being cut from the show. That was one of the first adaptational changes that I kind of went, because there is a broader pattern throughout these series of episodes to negate any moment in the story where Lestat has agency as a character. And that's not a small change. That's not, the scene is a little bit different. It is a fundamental rewrite of both the character from the book that this is based on, but also the character as he appears in season 1, or the character as he is perceived in season 1. Part 2. Lestat's character agency and narrative momentum. Lestat is aged up from the book to the show, from his early 20s to his early 30s. And the most significant change to me from the book to the show is what they choose to do with this added time, which is to say that he does nothing. Yes, Slay, give us nothing. He never even becomes a hunter. He never learns to channel his rage into violence. It's never been a lesson that's reinforced to him. It's a shameful confession that he gives to his mother. Lestat is a character who experienced this sense of rage that he was trained by the world around him, by society, by his family, by his mother, to channel into violence. I had imagined that would kind of, explain some of those disparities between the version of Lestat that we see in the show and the version in the book. One way that the show might explain that is with those extra 10 years, and what does it do to a human psyche when year after year the only thing that you're rewarded for is violence, is, your bloodlust, is, channeling your rage into killing, especially tackling the mythology around that role of male provider, the ways that leads into his existence as a vampire and his existence as, a serial killer. who is this man who can drop the person that he loves from, the sky. But instead, in the show, Lestat never becomes a hunter. When the wolves are mentioned, his brother says, "What does he want us to do about it?" And his mother answers, "Nothing. Sit there on your titles." And they cut to Lestat eating his meat with his eyes downcast. It wasn't just the writing that was systematically disempowering him. It was the way that shots were cut to. It was the sequence that they were shown in. It was basically every aspect of the story was working to disempower him, which I was so confused by, because usually I like for characters to make decisions that impact the plot of the show that I'm watching. The show has always taken liberties with its source material, but in season 1, those changes were to give their protagonist more agency, especially with Louis' active role in Lestat's attempted murder. Lestat doesn't even seek out rock music. He is approached by a future bandmate who told him that his guitar playing was sick. I started looking at the scenes and asking myself, what decisions does Lestat make in this narrative so far? I couldn't figure out a single decision that he makes. The only thing I could think of was him calling Gabrielle, but even so, she's the one who has the power of whether she comes or not. And he uses his inaction as a defense in the narration. He says, "I hadn't even told my band I was a vampire. I was just singing my songs and fucking my food and defending myself from the vibrant life choices I had made on my way from the Auvergne countryside to the 8th floor of this why bother hotel." Which is a direct inversion to his motivation in the books, where he says, "I had to find Louis. I had to talk to him. Old rules didn't matter to me now, either. I wanted to break every one of them. I wanted to find my lost ones, awaken those who slept as I had slept. I wanted mortals to know about us." In a scene that they omit from the show, after he returns from the monastery, Lestat cries to his mother about the dirt and decay that was everywhere here, and to tell how the monastery had been a place where if you set your mind to it, you could accomplish something. That conversation is what leads his mother to buy him the Mastiff puppies. It's because of his yearning for purpose. He says, "I raised those dogs, trained them, and founded a great kennel upon them. I became a true hunter with those dogs, and by the age of 16, I lived in the field." But in the show, he has no sense of purpose. And the narrative is held hostage by his indecision. When I look at the first 2 episodes, I try to figure out, what has happened, what has changed. In terms of Lestat's storyline, the main plot of our main character, the only thing that's changed is that now Gabriella is there. I guess his bandmates find out that he's a vampire, but he didn't have a say in that. That wasn't his choice. It wasn't his decision. No, it's so funny. You guys. Instead of adapting the plot of this book and the first half of that book, they said, "What if we gave you no plot?" It is hysterical. It is so funny, and I will never be happy again. Looking at these scenes in relation to season 1 is so interesting, because Lestat becomes a direct foil to Claudia, who tries to run away and is brought back, just like Lestat is. Lestat in season 1 becomes the father whose death he was complicit in. Claudia in season 1 speculates about his past, saying he would be a slave no more than I would. But the Lestat revealed to us in season 3 isn't a character who acts of his own volition. He's a character who is perceived to be acting of his own volition. In the flashbacks, we see that Lestat is passive. He only takes action when it's impressed upon him by others. Claudia, on the other hand, takes agency over his death. Lestat kills his family at his mother's request, but Claudia is the one to convince her other parent. She says, if you're going to beat Lestat, you have to become Lestat. You have to think like he does, and then 5 moves ahead of that. Claudia in season 1 is a leader, but Lestat is depicted as a follower. The Lestat that we're being shown in these flashbacks and in this season does mirror the Lestat that we see during the trial scene, in that Lestat is told to us to be this person who fights against the systems in place, who goes against the powers that be, who is willing to put himself on the line to shake things up, to change how the world is and how the world works. But in the trial scene, he doesn't do that. He goes along with the play. He wants Louis to be saved, but he doesn't actively defend him. He doesn't go against the very conceit of the play. He adds a line here and there, but he allows it to continue. He allows Claudia to be killed. And the only way that he acts to save Louis, it's not actually fighting the vampires, it's controlling the minds of the mortals. His action is still rooted through this kind of passivity, but it's directly contrary to people's idea of him. Lestat in his childhood complains about his family. He says, love nothing, do nothing, change nothing. By the end of the flashbacks, that spirit is broken. He's willing to throw his life away. He says, what is this life? The good in me lost at the monastery, my sense of wonder abandoned in a traveling player's wagon. The narration tells us she meant to kill me with the challenge. Better a quick end than watch me surrender another decade. Even there, the word choice, surrender. You know, that Lestat is framed as someone who has given up. But I do think that the undermining of Lestat's agency within this narrative is in service of the sexual abuse storyline that they are really completely fundamentally rewriting. So let's talk about Gabriella. Part 3. Fledgling, lover, mother. Escape was not an option for Gabriella Vecchi. The Marquis had promised her preservation and delivered her ruin. She sacrificed her youth, squandered her intellect, and paid a midwife to nick her in the womb so he couldn't humiliate her anymore. In the show, she screams that Lestat going on stage was an hour of not this place, but in the books, she is quiet, she's withdrawn, her world has become internalized. She stops engaging with her family and with the world around her, and instead uses books as her escape. She walls off everyone, including her children, and that's why Lestat doesn't get to have a mother. Or rather, he has a mother that he can see, but never know. In the books, Lestat fixates on Gabrielle's physical appearance, and it is treated as a manifestation of this separation that they can never bridge. When she gets sick, he says, her beauty, which was always very important to me, seemed vulnerable for the first time. Now she was slightly sunken, but she still looked beautiful to me. She still was beautiful. I liked looking at her. Her hair was full and blonde, and that I had inherited from her. To Lestat, her appearance symbolizes his connection to her, their undeniable connection, their biological relationship. And her body is also her husband's property. The image that Lestat idealizes of her is from when her body was not hers. When Gabrielle is made into a vampire, the changes that her body undergoes are overtly sexual. Lestat says, she had the fullness of young womanhood again, the breasts that the illness had withered away. They were swelling above the dark blue taffeta of her corset, the pale pink tint of her flesh so subtle it might have been reflected light. But her hair was even more astonishing because it appeared to be alive. So much color moved in it that the hair itself appeared to be writhing, billows of tiny strands stirring around the flawless white face and throat. In the very act of being freed, she is stripped of bodily control by the blood that she shares with her son. And after she's turned into a vampire, she cuts all of her hair off. It's the first thing that she does. And the next night, when it grows back, she screams. But Lestat likes her hair long. He likes to dress her in velvet gowns, even though she prefers to wear men's clothing. And in the times where she tries to show up for him as a mother, she lets him brush her hair despite her own discomfort with it. Gabrielle's discomfort with motherhood in the books is expressed through her discomfort with womanhood. The allusion drawn in Queen of the Damned is to Sleeping Beauty, the original version of which has a king find Sleeping Beauty and assault her in her sleep. While she's asleep, she gives birth to 2 twins and wakes up to a baby sucking on her finger. which is a direct parallel to Gabrielle's storyline. But in the books, the roles of lover and child are merged. Lestat is both savior, as her maker, and both the living reminder and enforcer of her lack of bodily agency. And yes, their relationship grooms Lestat for the events of Queen of the Damned. And I hate now that I have to defend the nuances of grooming, but they completely rewrote Gabriella to remove those elements. That storyline is given instead to Lestat. Lestat is this idea that looms larger in the minds of everyone than his actual agency allows for. Gabriella and Lestat are given opposite positions within the narrative. While Lestat loses agency throughout the story, Gabriella is given agency back to her. In the show, she's the one to tell him explicitly that she recognizes herself in his face, which is the opposite of, that dynamic in the book where he is the one who clings to her appearance as the only thing that he has to connect himself to her. Gabriella's gaze on her son is emphasized. The narration tells us, as front man, you're encircled by those who invariably want something from you. My mother, Gabriella Vecchi, rest her soul, was a complicated hang. The scene where their diverging relationships come into the sharpest focus is when Gabriella is tending Lestat's wounds, which is notable because the dialogue is word for word from the book, but the staging of that dialogue and the omission of others completely reframes the confession and illustrates the disparity between the dynamic when Lestat's gaze on Gabrielle's appearance is emphasized versus her gaze on him. In the books, Gabrielle likens Lestat's wolf fight to childbirth, and he agrees. But Lestat chose to fight the wolves. Childbirth was forced onto Gabrielle. Even when trying to relate to her son, she cannot remove her lack of autonomy. And it's directly after this comparison, this confession of hers about her own lack of autonomy, that she tells him, you know what I imagine? Not so much the murdering of them as an abandon which disregards them completely. I imagine drinking wine until I'm so drunk I strip off my clothes and bathe in the mountain streams naked. And then I imagine going into the village and up to the inn and taking into my bed any men that come there. Crude men, big men, old men, boys, just lying there and taking them one after another, and feeling some magnificent triumph in it. Some absolute release without a thought of what happens to your father or your brothers, whether they are alive or dead. In that moment, I am purely myself. I belong to no one. In the show, when she says, you know what I dream, she glances down to her son's bloody chest, and the camera pans down to where she starts rubbing the salve into the gashes. And, I want to be so clear, I need us to be on the same page about this, because both versions of this scene are emotional incest and grooming. But the context and the framing completely transforms them. In the books, she doesn't touch him. There is no physical contact. The bodily focus is on Gabrielle and her lack of bodily autonomy. And as she's talking, Lestat imagines her naked. Whatever bodily autonomy Gabrielle can achieve directly comes at the cost of her role as Lestat's mother. He becomes her confidant instead of her son, and the lines between the maternal and sexual are eroded. But the show makes the abuse explicit. Her hands wander across Lestat's body to tend his wounds, while she speaks of taking men into her bed. The focus is on his body. He delivers the added line, except for me, and when he says it, she leaves. Her freedom in the show entitles her to his body, but his claim to ownership over her sends her away. This mirrors the ending of episode 1, where Lestat is bloody and beaten. He is coming down from drugs still as he talks to Gabrielle, which is indicated in the next episode when he says that in their next conversation he was less pharmaceutically challenged. She comes to him when he is physically vulnerable. He has to crawl to reach his phone, but the first thing that she does when she sees him is she heals the wound on his face, the face that she recognizes herself in, and then she leans in to kiss him. And only after she starts leaning in does he close the distance. This pattern is reaffirmed again when he mentions that he only saw her twice in the last century, and one of those times was after Louis tried to kill him. When they mention her coming back, Gabriella says, My maker called for his mama, and I came, and came, and came. She positions her intent as directly sexual. She sought him out specifically when he was drugged and wounded and vulnerable for the purpose of sexual favors. And on some level, he knows this. He swallows when she says it. And he says about that, we need to make a pact if you're going to stay. And he immediately qualifies it. I want you to stay. His boundaries from the beginning are conditional upon her willingness to stay. And the request that he makes is companionship without the cum, which unfortunately is not the anti-incest win that we all want it to be, because in the show, companionship is tied specifically to romantic relationships. You know, Louis and Lestat were companions. Louis tells Armand that he doesn't want to be companions. Louis says that he's companion enough for himself, and he sleeps around but doesn't want commitment. Whereas Lestat wants commitment. He wants Gabrielle to commit to him, and the language that he uses is romantic. He just doesn't want a sexual component to their relationship, which is much closer to the relationship that they have in the books. She never makes any physical advances on him. He is the one to kiss her while she is hemorrhaging on her deathbed. Before he turns her into a vampire, he tastes the blood on her open lips. And they do feel love for each other, but it's a broken love, muddied by their shared oppression as well as the role that they play in each other's suffering. It highlights how love and abuse coexist. Even the name change from Gabrielle to Gabriella is so significant, because in the books, she is referred to with a French name, which would have been the name that she was expected to take on in her marriage, the same way that Marie Antoinette was not French, but when she married into the French royal family, she was expected to change her name from Maria Antonia to Marie Antoinette. In the show, she keeps her Italian name. She is given a lot more agency over herself and her life, while Lestat's agency is stripped away, and that creates a completely different dynamic in the show when she then goes on to start grooming him. In the show, Gabriella is overtly coercive, testing again and again the one boundary that he sets, you know, putting on provocative displays for him, asking if he has a lot of sex and if he enjoys it like drinking the blood. When he tells her that it's never like the blood, she nicks his neck to drink from him, literally using him for her own consumption. Lestat's narration frames it as mutual. He says, "We rode the edges of our pact," but all of the advances are one-sided, and they are after he's indicated wanting their sexual relationship to end. When he mentions his mother, he adds, "Rest her soul." He sees Gabriella's vampiric existence as a separate entity from his mother. In giving Gabriella freedom, she ceases to be his mother. She abandons the role of mother, and instead becomes his fledgling. The only power that Lestat is allowed in their dynamic comes at the cost of not having a mom. In this way, when they kill his father, Lestat is orphaned. His mother is dead, only his fledgling remains, and she killed his father. Lestat orphans the children of his family just as he is orphaned, and he lies awake, hearing the screams of the children. The show parallels his experience with theirs, and the show uses children's voices to represent Lestat's emotional interiority at this point, and then again, after Gabrielle drinks his blood, when she pulls back and a little child's voice plays over the speakers, the child of their next victim, telling her dad that she can't sleep, while Lestat stares at his mother. The father says, "Listen to your mom, I'll give you a kiss when I get home," but of course he's never going to get home. He is Gabriella's next meal. Lestat watches another family break while being used by his mother as a sexual object, because the only substitute for comfort he has ever been given in the face of distress requires and demands sexual access. And the one theme that all of these changes work together to illuminate is that theme of sexual commodification. That's why I'm dressed like this. That's why for day 2 I said we're gonna do robe, bralette, little corset moment. My makeup look today I call appeasing the interests of capital. In episode 2, Lestat and Gabriella hunt a group of building glass salesmen closing a sale on a substantial amount of glass sold to a company in yet-to-be-tariffed Germany. The businessmen go to a strip club, and while Lestat watches the dancers, his lawyer, Christine, calls him. She tells him that he has to meet Thomas Pitt, the owner of the hotel that Lestat was attacked in. Pitt wants an exclusive fan experience, and Lestat purses his lips, asking, "Do I have to fuck him?" Christine tells him yes. He is positioned in parallel to the dancers at the strip club, but given less sexual autonomy. The sexuality that he performs on stage is demanded off stage, and the lines between life and performance are blurred. Lestat's greatest bargaining tool is his sexuality. It's the first performance that he ever learned. He's not allowed personhood from the time that he is still at home with his mom. And that change carries through into the present day, where still he is systematically disempowered by the narrative, by the show. He becomes a lightning rod for all of these vampires' attention, but visibility doesn't give him power. It makes him a commodity to be bought and sold. He is the public face of his own abuse. The conceit of that one scene where he gets the call from Christine in the strip club is that he was attacked by a vampire coven, and he is expected to use his body to pay for the damages. So Lestat goes to the meeting with Thomas Pitt, and it's Louis, his ex-husband, whose interview led to a book being published and sold about Lestat. Because of Louis, Lestat's life is commodified, not just his performance. And it was commodified without his knowledge or consent, by the person that he loved and trusted the most. This is the first meeting of theirs that we've seen since the book's publication, and it was arranged under the false pretense that Lestat would have to sleep with him. Lestat is the performer, he's the body on stage, but Louis is an owner. Lestat says, bottom line Louis, all sins negotiated. And Louis tells Lestat that he owns 45% of Lestat's merchandise, actively diminishing Lestat's sense of influence and thereby his sense of power. The one theme that the show really seems interested in looking at is the commodification of Lestat, of his story, of his personhood. I mean, the very book that they're adapting was sold on his name. It was sold as the Vampire Lestat. The show implicates itself among the forces that Lestat has to fight. The image of him is the product, is the commodity. And what the show is looking at is, what does that do to a person? What does that do to an individual when the image of them, the idea of them, has more power than they do? How does that impact a relationship when the person who exploits you is the person that you're in love with? And yet in that telling, he is given more agency by his family than he ever displays in at least these first 2 episodes of the season, which is the relationship that Lestat has with Gabrielle in the books. But now Lestat is the one who has this image of him that looms larger than his actual personhood, who can be seen but never known, even by the people who want to be there for him, who want to know him. Lestat's response to the book being published is to become a rock star, to start filming a documentary about himself. He commodifies himself again, but in a way that he has more control over, which is the same reason that he performs sexuality. You know, it is an attempt to control his own objectification. If it's going to happen anyway, at least now it's on his terms. He performs the image of himself that he doesn't have a say in crafting. Filming the documentary turns his life into the performance, but he's still powerless over its framing or narrative direction. So the show is narrated from a collection of records. These are explicitly positioned as a product and sold off in the opening scene to a very privileged individual. Lestat's story is a product to be consumed, being bid on by his exes. And he sells a bottle of his blood with it, his life force on the auction block, sold for the highest bidder's consumption. You know, he has been taught, he has been trained throughout this season and throughout his life to view himself as a commodity. And so now he is a commodity that he sells himself. The one push that we do see him have, his one purpose within this story, is to rewrite that narrative. Every narrative has been written about him. Everyone has decided for him who he is and what he is. And the only action that he really makes up through these first 2 episodes that we've seen is to say, no, I want to tell my version of it. The image of Lestat that looms large over him, over the character of him, is the version of Lestat from this book. The legacy of this Lestat is the one who turns him into a lightning rod for all of these vampires, who creates the turmoil that the Lestat of the show has to deal with and has to face. And I think it's interesting that the image of the Lestat from the books looms so large, not only over the narrative, but over the character himself. He is fighting against the very perception of him that the books create. And from narration, he tries to reshape the story to please him. He performs sexuality openly and blatantly. He calls sex the 4th best thing a vampire can do to avoid thinking about the past. Carnal pleasure is essential to a vampire's survival, if only to keep time's baggage from burying you. Sexuality is both the performance demanded of him and his coping mechanism to escape it. And this sexualization of the character, I think, is in a lot of ways a condemnation of its audience, because when you look at who are the people that are paying to listen to Lestat's story, to ogle his body and consume his sexuality, it's us, the people who are watching the show. Through narration, he gives himself voice that he didn't have in childhood, but he can't write out his narrative passivity. He can't omit his lack of agency, only reframe it, and try to shape how the characters will be perceived. The show is a lot more concerned with class politics than the books ever are, which is good, which is really good, because Anne Rice is really good at writing a lot of things. She is not good at writing class. It was actually one of the most distracting elements of the book. It was one of the things in the book that was the hardest in both The Vampire Lestat and Queen of the Damned. That was like the thing that was the hardest for me to swallow, was the way that she was writing about class, and I was like, not the time. And I think that it's awesome that the show is looking at that. You know, what does vampirism look like when you add back in class dynamics? Vampirism has always been, a metaphor that class has been spoken about with, because it is literally, people surviving and thriving off of the consumption of others at their expense. So it lends itself very well to class discussions and discussions of wealth disparities. Lestat describes the 21st century as the dark, dreary, industrial world has finally submitted to automation. Laborers stand in their doorways, hitting their pipes as their children half-pipe in their drained, empty swimming pools. He refers to the young generation as Gen Snooze, but in the narrative, Lestat becomes the symbol of the present moment. His life has become the commodity. He has become a subject to capital. He tells Daniel, "It's my era now." We're introduced not to the Lestat who shapes the world around him through the sheer force of his will. We are instead introduced to a Lestat who has been systematically disempowered. We are introduced to, in effect, proletariat icon Lestat. Guys, it all comes back to the French Revolution. It all comes back. Oh, they've got to make the French Revolution a really big deal. Everything that they're talking about in this show has to do with class, and they have the French Revolution to play with. That has to be huge. There has to be so many connections between that. And just like that, the show won me back. They won me over, because Proletariat icon Lestat is so exciting to me. This is not your mom's Lestat. This is a Lestat who eats the rich. He's the Lestat that speaks for my generation. One embarrassing TikTok reference at a time. He's not the Lestat that we need. He's the Lestat we deserve. The book, The Vampire Lestat, was published in 1985. The Lestat of that version is the Wolfkiller. He is able to effect change in the world around him. He can make covens fall. He can alter the course of vampire history. And the show is directly commenting on this and saying, in the present moment, is it possible to be in control of your own narrative? If the world only sees you as a commodity, how do you change the world? How do you change the systems that be when the systems that be strip you of your agency? And so this Lestat has had his dreams broken. He has had that optimism, that idealism, that hope about the future stripped away from him. The good in him lost at the monastery, his sense of wonder abandoned in a traveling player's wagon. He is a powerful vampire, and yet he is powerless to his own commodification. In the books, Lestat dreams of the wolves, and he hears church bells. The wolf pack that the book is the most concerned with, the pinnacle of pack mentality in the novel, is religion, and is the question of how does the world exist without religion? But in the 21st century, the wolf pack that controls Lestat's life isn't the Catholic Church, it is capital. It is capitalism. It is the bourgeoisie. And in the 21st century, when he has been trained his entire life to allow abuse, to preen for it, when his hope has been stripped away and his agency diminished by the very show that is supposed to tell his story, when the real wolf pack is the capital that controls not only his narrative, but also his body, can an individual still be the wolf killer? And that's it! That's all I'm going to be filming about this one episode of television. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see my reaction to this episode, feel free to click that right here. And if you would like to see my analysis of episode 1, please click here. If you would like to see any of my future reactions or any of my future analyses for the season, please hit the subscribe button. And if you're on mobile, then please hit the hype button, because this is a brand new channel. I literally just started it a month before this season came out because I just was so excited to talk about it and I knew that I would have so much to say. If you enjoyed this video about, fighting the interests of capital, please consider checking out my Patreon. I have right now a few a cappella versions of some of the songs that they released, but I plan to add a lot more stuff to that Patreon page after the season is finished airing. I'm just so busy right now writing 5.5 thousand words about this single 45-minute episode of television. I really hope that they stick the landing. I'm rooting for them. We're all rooting for them. There is so much potential. There is so much potential in this show and in this story, and especially in these books. I love the Vampire Lestat book. If you would like to check out my reaction to the book, please check out my book club. That is a separate channel. We are just going to be talking about the book over there. I don't want to bring any future book plot points into our discussion about the show because I don't want to spoil it. And also I want to discover this version of the story that the show is telling us as it's revealed to us. I don't want to, kind of bring my future expectations from having read the book into it, at least as much as I can help it. Happy Brat Prince Summer, and I will see you for the next episode.